I'm hoping that I'm going to be an energetic.
I can tell already that you're going to be fantastic. Despite the fact that you don't think the world's going to end. Hey, welcome America to Unscripted. It's the show, perhaps the last show of all time. He doesn't think so, but I do. Where we try to educate and entertain by covering the news of the day. Not that there's any news today. And then we do a get to know the CEOs. Oh my God, get to know the CEO segment, where we talk about the CEO's favorite bands, movies, and books. I have your list right here. Very nice list you have. But before we get to you, we have to talk about what's going on in popular culture. You ready?
Bring it on.
Okay. Before we get to the news, though, I'm sure everybody knows. So here's the deal. Every day in the United States, and I know you're originally from the Ukraine, there's some reason to celebrate. Every day is a national day of something. It's not always Christmas or Easter or Thanksgiving. Some days it's National Cupcake Day or National Redheads Day, which it is today. But more importantly, obviously, National American Football Day, what we've all been excited to celebrate on here on Tuesday, November 5th. How do you feel about American football being from Ukraine? Do you have any feelings towards it? Because I know you live in Chicago, right?
I do live in Chicago. And listen, I'm going to trust it here, Eric Ryan, that today is actually American National Football Day. And what a wonderful day to get your mind off of everything else that's happening there, right? Well, actually, no, we shouldn't be getting our voting is very important. If that's the one thing we're going to talk about here is to go out there and vote. Yep. I'm a big fan of football. I was really excited. I was, I've got a really nice, healthy, healthy is a relative term, fantasy football team. So
how you doing? What's your record?
I am 5-4. Last year's league champion. I'm really proud of it. You know what? I've got some good strategies. I think I'm pulling off some really good wins. I've got horrible injuries, so I'm plucking people from the waiver wire, and I am making it happen.
Nice job. The Chicago Bears started off hot, and now they're 4-4, but you have a bright future. I think Caleb Williams is the real deal, and I need to believe this.
Caleb Williams is great. He got me all of 8 points.
Oh, you have Caleb Williams.
Not great. But you know what? I'm rooting for the Bears. I think they just need to find their ebb and flow, and I think they're going to be a good team.
Yeah. I feel sorry for the Bears. Their one championship came against my New England Patriots. For 20 years, listen, I miss this man. This guy gave me 6 rings. My wife only gave me 1. The Patriots. This is the thing about being a Patriots fan. They're the best team in the most popular sport, and we had the best player. The equivalent is being into baseball in 1925 and being a Yankees fan with Babe Ruth. But mine lasted 20 years. So I'm in the middle of I'm in a 5-year mourning period where we suck now. So I know what it's like to be a fan of every other team, and it's fucking awful.
I experienced the tumultuous and also wonderful times of the Chicago Bulls here in the 90s.
The Bulls.
Listen, you draw that reference. I'm going to say it's like, the peak Phil Jackson, Pippen, Jordan, and 6 championships. That was a good time. Also, the Blackhawks, 3 championships in 5 years created a dynasty over what was only like a half a decade. Listen, we got a little spoiled. And then 2016, the broken record, 108 years, Eric Ryan. Holy cow. Guess what? I was there for games 3 and 5. Extraordinary Wrigley Field experience. Watching the Cubs take it home in, my gosh, 1908. Goodness gracious.
You know what's crazy about the Cubs and the Red Sox? Same GM with Theo Epstein broke our curse, which was from 83, 84 years, something like that, and your curse. I don't know why we don't talk about Theo Epstein every day. He's the greatest GM in the history of all of sports. It's crazy.
Good Lord. That's when I was born.
Oh, really? In 1918?
83.
I looked this up in one of these articles. Americans spent 974 billion minutes watching football in 2023. I know we all need leisure. That's a lot of minutes. I don't know how you calculate that, but can you imagine if we spent that productively? Listen, we all need downtime, don't get me wrong, but that is a lot of minutes.
It's an extraordinary amount of time. That's a very interesting metric, Eric. I had no idea. Let's just say this. Me and my ADHD brain like to multitask, so I want to say a few of those minutes were probably spent doing something in parallel. At least for me. Okay. Maybe like baking bread or something.
I think you're in the minority, but this is what I know. So football has been the most popular sport since 1972. Of sports watchers, 79% are football fans, 61% are basketball, only 50% are baseball. So, I don't know. Great American sport going in the toilet.
That's interesting.
Football. I love it. I'm glad you love it too. I think we have, here's the thing. You drafted the number 1 quarterback. We got the number 3. The number 2 is very good. This might be the year where the first 3 guys taken are legitimately good. Let's please, God, I need football back in my life. All right. Let's move on to the news so we can talk about you, shall we?
Let's do it.
Okay. This isn't really today's news, but I did want to bring this up. Quincy Jones died 2 days ago. This man, holy shit. He died at 92. Good long life. Have you seen this documentary? Are you aware of Quincy Jones's work at all?
Oh man. Quincy Jones was an extraordinary human being. If I'm not mistaken, he was 91 years old when he passed away. And yeah, I'm really familiar with his work. He is one of the absolute paramount leaders, African-American leaders in the music space, having collaborated with everyone from like Frank Sinatra to many of the biggest names. Michael Jackson's Thriller, holy cow, he helped produce it. He helped produce that album and just turned something extraordinary as it was from a talented individual into something that's even more special. I have not seen this documentary. Thank you for putting it up. I am a big fan of Quincy Jones, and not just of himself, what he's done, but really what he's done for other people in the industry.
It's ungoddamn believable. None of these articles about his death do it justice, and they can. I mean, this documentary is 2 hours long, but I'll say this. Beautiful American dream story. He was born poor in Chicago. I think everybody's born poor in
that's
Chicago.
Right.
Yep. So he grew up eating fried rats that his grandmother would cook. She would eventually get institutionalized for something when he was 7. But so he was born poor, eating fried rats, died with $500 million in the bank. Oh. He scored 30 movies. I'm almost positive he moved to France to learn how to score movies. He played the piano, the tuba, the trumpet, the trombone. So 80 Grammy nominations. Not only did he do Thriller, but he did Michael Jackson's first album, Off the Wall. Then he did Bad. And he, for all intents and purposes, discovered adult Michael Jackson. Because he was nobody, like, he was in the Jackson 5, but until Quincy Jones produced his albums, he wasn't like Michael Jackson as we understand him. He found Oprah, like he discovered Oprah. The man's footprint on popular cultures is unfathomable.
We could literally probably spend the remainder of this webinar talking about his work with Dizzy Gillespie, Miles Davis, Count Basie, oh my God, Aretha Franklin. I mean, like literally this man, and it's not that he made careers, right? Those were very talented individuals. He exemplified them and he amplified really wonderful human beings.
Yeah, and he was a philanthropist. He did the thing for the Ethiopia Famine Relief Fund, where we got 46 of the biggest names in the music industry together to do "We Are the World." And he did the classic thing. He's got 7 kids from 5 different women, so he really took advantage of his fame. Which this is what you do when you're a multinational superstar with millions in the bank. That's what you're supposed to do. But I'll say this too. The documentaries about these mega music producers are so good. This is good. The one on Clive Davis is good. The one on David Geffen is unbelievable. Like between those 3 men, their footprint or fingerprint is on every song we've ever listened to.
I appreciate this so much. I'm not even kidding. I know we're live right now. I'm making a note to make sure I watch Quincy on the airplane today as I travel into a Washington Dulles airport. Of all the days that I decided to fly into our nation's capital,
bad idea.
Today, Ryan.
Very bad idea. But watch this, so you'll enjoy your last hours on Earth. I mean, it's just so impressive. The man was just, and I'm almost positive because nobody mentioned this. The flying to France to learn how to do movies was like so ballsy. And again, a poor kid from Chicago eating fried rats to one of the greatest music producers of all time. It's just what a beautiful American dream story.
I was just gonna say, what a wonderful, wonderful journey.
Now, speaking of the American dream, we have the death of the American dream coming up too. Oh my God, the average age of U.S. home buyers jumps to 56. Homes are wildly unaffordable for young people, real estate expert says. This is one of those things that I feel like no one's ever going to really talk about because of the election. We got a lot going on. But this article is unbelievable. So
is this real?
Yes, it's so bad. Listen to all these numbers. So it's the average. Okay, it's not the average first-time home buyer. It's the average home buyer. So they're 56, but it jumped 6 years between now and last year. It's a historic high. First-time home buyers are also jumped from 35 to 38. House prices since 2020 are up 39%. Interest rates have doubled. Yeah, so wrap your head around this. So you're somebody, you got student loan debt, you got a high rate, high rent, low wages, eggs are $1 billion goddamn dollars. Life is expensive. The average home in the United States is $435,000. 18%, which is a down payment, is 78 grand. The median income is 80. How can anybody afford to buy a house?
Wow. I think here's the thing, Eric. I think for everybody listening, I didn't know you were going to bring this up. I feel like you handpicked, curated some of the most interesting parts I think of happening in the news. All right. Here's optimistic Bill Klayman. I hope you're ready.
Okay.
Listen,
No, I'm ready.
We're going to have some interest rate cuts. We're going to have a better fluctuation of inventory of homes coming in, right? We are seeing construction going up and increasing slowly, right? Let me go ahead and draw a parallel of this. We are seeing an all new class of millionaires emerge, and that is not people working in technology. These are plumbers, electricians, people who are building these homes that are unfortunately getting older and older. People are buying them, but I feel like with every ebb and flow, we're going to be experiencing the nice little flow here. Where in the very near future, I think that there's going to be an decrease in mortgage rates. I think we're going to have a nice little flux of homes becoming available. So I am hoping that, oh my God, that number goes down. Good Lord.
You were so optimistic. I'm glad we're going to have another class of millionaires, because if you look at the average house prices across, like, listen, obviously some of these are hard to read because it's small. Massachusetts, where I live, I think it's 630, something like that. My house was more than that. But look at Hawaii. Hawaii's $837,000. And people think Hawaii is this destination vacation paradise. Yes, also there were natives who lived there who are being outpriced by people who are like, hey, let's go get a vacation home because they got a few million in the bank.
Very, very, very true.
Yeah, and look at California. The average house is $743,000. This seems so wildly unsustainable. I'm just hoping at some point we stop seeing systems break in my lifetime. It's too much. It's too much. Like, buying a house shouldn't be. This is fiscally irresponsible, but so is renting. It's almost as if life is fiscally irresponsible at this point.
I listen, you're preaching to the choir. I agree with you. I think equal housing and being able to just be able to get a house or a home over your head, roof over your head, is going to be really important. Again, positive approach. I'm hoping that when we see the sunrise tomorrow, and the sun will rise tomorrow, I promise. Everyone listening, I promise. I really do believe that we're going to be set for a really nice course here, that we're going to see some improvement. It's really been, a lot of it's been revolving around the mortgage rates, right? And I know this is completely, Eric, right? Not what we're going to be talking about, but when you have mortgage rates that are like 7, 8, 9%, and I, as a homeowner, am sitting here on a 2.75% mortgage. I'm not going to sell this house. Are you
2.75? Oh my God.
Money? No way. But as we sort of see that stuff line out, you're going to see folks that want to downsize. You're going to see folks that want to move into different kind of living communities. I think we're going to see, hopefully, this level out by, I'm not going to say by the end of next year, but certainly by 2030.
I hope so. So part of the article too says that young people are out there competing with these 56-year-olds who, you want to blame the boomers, but I think 56 is Gen X. But they have a lot of money and they have cash offers, and they can just outbid everybody for a reasonable house, which is also sort of shitty.
Cash is king. I think that is an extremely true statement, especially in the days of high interest rates. That's it. That's basically it.
I think what happened at some point in this country, I always equate everything to the vet. The vet's like, listen, your cat needs this surgery. It's going to be $2,000, or we could kill it for $300. And like, they get you above a barrel. They finally realized that they have us over the barrel with groceries, housing, and heat, because we need those things. It's either that or we die. So they can just charge whatever they want. I guess we're going to come up with it, but it's not. So this is not sustainable. If this keeps up, if houses continue to jump 39% every 4 years, I don't know, man. It's going to be good.
I mean, tiny homes.
I'm too American for a tiny home. I want a giant pool.
That's true. Sorry, putting on my European hat. You're right.
They can. Well, here's the thing. They convinced us that we could have this lifestyle, and then we're like, yeah, I want that. And they're like, no. How's a tiny home? And then, no point did you sell me on a tiny home.
Listen, I was convinced of this lifestyle, and here I am in America, and I'll tell you what, despite its ups and downs, best country in the world.
Yeah. Well, you could say that because you got a 2.7 more. 0.7%.
Well, that, and I grew up in communist freaking Ukraine. So yes, United States is doing fine. Really. I can't stress this enough. Coming from a communist country, we're going to be okay. Promise.
Yeah. At least we could buy a house, right? And Russia's not bombing us with drones. Yeah.
No, you are given a house if you are so lucky, or an apartment. Good point, Eric.
Okay. Well, let's move on to, speaking of unaffordable, I really don't have a dog in this race, but I do find that the vitamin shop was very expensive. You go to buy vitamins at the vitamin shop or GNC, you're going to need to take out a second mortgage, because I don't know what it is with supplements. Here's what I do know, though. The guy that wrote this very popular book, The 4-Hour Workweek, his advice was essentially open up a supplement e-commerce store, charge out the ass, and then hire some foreigners to do your work for you. So this has always been a thing, like supplements, the high margin rates, and here's what I know about the United States. We import the most supplements. We manufacture the most supplements. We take the most supplements. We have the most gyms. We have the most gyms in the world. There's 41,370 gyms. So obviously we take a lot of supplements. We're making a lot of supplements. We have a shit ton of gyms. We must be very fit. We're the 13th fattest country on the planet. So what do you think is going on between our obsession with supplements, our obsession with gym memberships, and being fat? Did you see anything?
Yeah, and capitalism. I mean, I think what drives so much of this country, right, is how do we produce something that the consumer market here in the United States would want, and how do we create margins that are obviously something you could live off of, like that one gentleman said, just open up e-commerce store for vitamins. That's all it is, right? I think, listen, number 13 is not bad. Come on, America, you can do better. Let's go for number 1. I'm kidding. Please don't. That's not a list you want to top.
Keep in mind, okay, so 13 without context, I don't know how bad that sounds, but there are only 195 countries. So we're in the top to 10 percentile fat-wise.
I don't know which way, if I want to wave that flag. Listen, I mean, I think you know, from an American perspective, yes, there's a lot of gyms. And I don't know if you remember this, they just passed legislation so you can finally make it easier for you to quit
Thank
a gym.
God. Thank God.
Oh my gosh. It's basically like, you know, taxes death and your gym membership, which will never go away. Apparently, at least one of those have been made easier.
It was like breaking out of prison. I tried to break up with a gym once, and they had me notarize. No, like who the fuck notarizes to stop it? It was ABC Financial, by the way. You do terrible things.
Holy cow. I've never had that happen. You have to notarize a gym membership quitting. That's a new one. Wow.
That's how they get you. This is the thing about the vitamin shop too. Like in the early, I think most males, when they're in their teenage years in college, are like, oh, I'm going to get into working out. Luckily, in those years, the vitamin shop and GNC used to sell shit that works, i.e. Andro and HGH. And then, so that shit really worked. And then obviously because it works, the US government stepped in and made it illegal. But the grand irony is the stuff that Vitamin Shop and GNC, it doesn't even work. All the good stuff, steroids, HGH and Andro, you going to buy it from the guy behind a 7-Eleven. So,
which I'm going to go on record and say I don't recommend you do any of that. Yes.
No, it seems to work though.
Go just drink your whey protein powder and do something.
Oh yeah, protein and creatine. It's not going to do anything for you. I will say this about this is sad because it's just another death of a physical store. And I do like Toys R Us was devastating because growing up, I don't know if they had those in Ukraine, but going to Toys R Us as a child was a magical experience. It was like
they brought it back, Eric. They brought it back. They did bring it back, right? It's not Toys R Us in its glorious form, unfortunately, but Macy's now, especially here in Chicago, you just basically go downstairs. It's a basement Toys R Us, but it's a giant section. You got Jeffrey the giraffe sitting there. It's not quite the full-on store experience, but I took my kid there, my little 6-year-old. It was close. It was close.
Good, because like all my kids have now is they know the toy section at Walmart and Target. I guess thank God for those, but it wasn't the mecca. It's not the mecca that was Toys R Us. And I just think, all right, not that, Vitamin Shop and GNC were on that level, but physical stores dying is sad. I get that they had to overcharge because they get rent and blah, 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 blah. But man, I don't know. It has to be a happy medium. We don't seem to have found it. Like Spirit Halloween. Oh, I love Spirit Halloween. Oh,
they will take over any building,
including all the vitamin shops.
Exactly.
Yes. So yeah, that's come full circle. Okay. Those are the news stories. I try to stay apolitical on this just because, it's on LinkedIn and people are very right and it scares me. All right, let's talk about you. Let's get to know the CEO here. You ready?
Bring it on. Pleasure.
Okay. Very interesting picks. I mean, I don't know what there's definitely a through line with the second two, but the first one is sort of a classic choice. These fellas, little unknown band from England, I believe. What are they? The Beatles? Is that who they are? What about the Beatles speaks to you?
It's actually kind of a very special story. When I was in Kyiv, growing up, my the Soviet government would only allow you to listen to things that were approved by the government, and some of the stuff you'd have to get through the black market. And so, like in Kyiv, my brother and I and my dad sometimes we'd go to these big open air markets. They were totally black markets, and there was police officers there. You just need to give them a couple rubles, and everything's fine. But that's where you'd go to get like your Casio calculators, your Levi jeans, all this really stuff that was imported from Europe and sold. And one of those things, and again, I remember this very clearly, was like records from like Elvis and specifically the Beatles. And I remember listening to like Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart, and I remember the White Album, and just this extraordinary innovation and experimentation of them creating music, and this is something you'll hear talked about, a band within a band kind of a concept. It was really wonderful to listen to them, and that honestly was some of my first introduction into let's call it the American European type of culture, English speaking, I guess, in general. And I loved it. And that was pretty much like one of the first real Western type of music that I got a chance to hear, and I loved it. It was happy, it was upbeat, well, most of the songs, right? But like just what they did with music, I think spoke to me, and still does, I think, in growing up. And it was again something that I heard in a communist country, that some songs I was allowed to hear and some I wasn't. Honestly, I don't know which ones it was. I just know that my brother brought back the record to our apartment and we listened to it, and it brings back really like one of those, like a Ratatouille moment, right? You think back in your childhood and get good memories.
That is so you were, it's almost a man without a country thing, because okay, so I think most people's experience with the Beatles fresh was probably 1964 to 1969, however long they lasted.
Mine was in the late 80s. Mine was in the late 80s, before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Well, my parents listened. Like I said, there were things that you could watch. Like so you could go to the movie theaters and you could watch a sanctioned movie, like Star Wars. Star Wars, for example, like the original ones, episode 3, 4, 5, they were available, with subtitles and a little bit redacted, but they were largely available. And so were the Beatles. And yeah, you're right. They came out, right? So, you had all these albums, 68 and 66 coming out and all of that. But, for me, yeah, it was hearing them for the first time in like 86, 87, 88 before coming to the United States, and just falling in love with the music and the style and the guitars and the rock and the noise and the sound. It was really cool.
Wow, that's wild. I think about the Beatles in terms of like almost them, Elvis, peak monoculture. And this is borne out, I think, with statistics, because when they went on the Ed Sullivan Show in 1964, 70 million people watched. 70 million people don't watch anything these days outside like the Super Bowl. So I love that, there's a lot to be said for not having a monoculture, because a lot more people have opportunities to break through the internet, blah, blah, blah. But like, I just love the idea that they brought a lot of people together. Everybody could talk about the Beatles and you would know what they were talking about, Plus, the Beatles did so much outside of music. I mean, the way music is produced, the way music is sold, fashion, drugs. Like they weren't together that long. It was almost like the Confederacy, like a big impact, but wasn't really around that long.
I would agree. And it was, like I said, it was a lot of fun to listen to them and grow up with them. And even coming here to the United States, I remember when we came to the United States, we would go out and we would try and find when the CDs came out, like actual CDs, or we would buy the big albums, and my brother and I would just sit there and listen to them.
Wild. So this is another thing I want to say about Quincy Jones. It was a good thing, because have you ever heard what Quincy said about the Beatles?
What did he say?
Okay, there's no accounting for taste, obviously. We established Quincy Jones as one of the greatest musical minds of anyone's generation. He said about the Beatles, they were the worst musicians in the world. They were no playing motherfuckers. Paul was the worst bass player ever heard, and Ringo, don't even talk about it. So, doesn't that make you like, right? I mean, the man discovered Michael Jackson for the most part and despised everything about the Beatles. No accounting for taste.
I think he's allowed to have an opinion. And I think listen, agree to disagree, and I think it's okay to have opinions about musicians that you might not favor.
I mean, clearly history has proven Quincy Jones to be wrong in this guy. Even a clock that's right all day is wrong. I don't know what the analogy here is, but I mean, he got that one wrong, clearly.
Absolutely.
The other thing I like about the Beatles too is they were featured in Outliers, which is probably my favorite book by Malcolm Gladwell, and they talked about the 10,000 hour rule. They're the ones who played 10,000 hours in German strip clubs, which is a nice. that's weird, right? Conceptually bizarre.
It's a good fun fact. I did not know that.
You got to grind away. Oh, and then my favorite quote too, like I think it was Lennon. They were at a thing, and somebody asked if Ringo was the greatest drummer in the world, and John Lennon goes, "Ringo's not even the greatest drummer in the Beatles." It's a good singer. No. They contributed a lot. Okay, we're gonna make a jump here from the Beatles to somebody. Yeah. This is the thing about a monoculture. This guy, having done some research, very popular. I had no idea who he is.
Armin Did you really not know who he is?
This is what I know. He's been voted the world's greatest DJ 5 times in a row. He's got Grammys. He's got 40 million listeners on his fucking radio show. I've never heard of him. Never heard of him. This is why we need a monoculture back. Yeah. So tell me why you love Mr. Van Buren here.
Armin van Buren, he's got everything from Imagine to one of his newer albums called Breathe In. Listen, it's a style of music. It's electronic dance, right? It's synths. It's all of that. But he, as a musician, is extraordinary and is an outlier. He's been married to the same person for a long time, really controls and balances his personal life and his gigs, is exceedingly talented as an actual musician and composer outside of how he applies his music to like the electronic realm. And one of the things that I really like him, by the way, that radio show is called A State of Trance. It's we listen to it. It's every week it comes out with something new, and he puts on some of the best records, and we listen to him live, broadcasting from his booth out in Amsterdam.
40 million listeners.
It's a lot. It's really good. It's really good music. It's a 2-hour show, and it's like you see him working in his booth. And it is weird, right? We would go from Beatles to Armin van Buren, and this is one of my favorite. It's one of my wife's favorite artists. He produces very uplifting vocal, trance, electronic dance music that fun to go to on a walk in the forest, fun to go work out in, right? Really good high energy kind of pumping sound. And he is one of the pioneers. He's a pioneer in the EDM space, right? Obviously having all of that. And you can tell, right? It's one of the best DJs in the world. Some of the most biggest sold albums I think he's ever had out there. I mean, the Spotify views or listens that he's got is like, 55, 60 million plus per song. I like him because he brings in a flavor of music I think that a lot of people don't know about, and yet, for example, in Europe and other places here in the United States, it's quite frequently listened to. And I'm not sure you're not surprised. One of my other favorites was Daft Punk, but that's actually a completely separate reason why I really like them. But I love Armin. I think he's great. He is just a positive, outspoken individual that is a ray of sunshine, I think, in the industry. Really just kind of a good dude.
Interesting. Well, I'll say this. So the DJ culture never really permeated my soul, but this to me sounds like college and drugs, which is great because I have very positive, connections there. I will say too, on the ballot today in Massachusetts is the decriminalization of psychedelics, and psychedelics do well with trance music. So hopefully this works out. The other thing, so the DJ thing, I don't really know I don't play any instrument, but I think in the popular zeitgeist, you can wrap your head around guitars, drums, all this other stuff. So I just don't know what they do, but I will say this. Somebody had a scratching DJ so on their list once. So I went to YouTube and I watched like a scratching tutorial, and I was like, oh, it is hard. And now there are things they do.
We don't have a lot of time to go into this. I did DJ for let's call it a brief part of my life, and we'll call it professionally here in the Chicago area. Yep. It's much more than just obviously pressing buttons. You must know musical theory, at least to some extent. You must know, for example, metronomic counts. Is it a 3 count? Is it a 4 count? You need to understand where there are couplets and where there's sections in songs that you can mix, cut to kill a bass, a mid, or a vocal isolation, for example. So the idea isn't just to press a button and to mix into another song. The idea is to make a vocal musical compilation that, sort of expresses who you are, but also flows in an equal sort of genre musical format for an hour. It could be, there's a lot of different types of electronic dance music, everything from dub and rave and drum and bass, all of this stuff. This is my favorite. Trance and vocal trance is my favorite. I think it's more melodic. But for those folks that think that DJs are there just to press buttons, you can do that and you'll actually probably create like okay music. What he does and what these types of DJs do, and it's just not him. There's also obviously maybe people who have heard of like Tiesto or Hardwell, Cascade. These are maybe names they're not familiar to you, but these are folks that have been around for a very, very long time. Their names aren't like Little Snoopy or whatever rap artists, but that are covered in. Listen, I heard Eminem go at it recently on mumble rap, and I will have to agree with him on there. But these are folks that use a different form of musical creation through synthetics, right? And I think it's wonderful.
I think it's I think about this concept a lot. The informed viewer or the informed listener is so much different. For example, if you were a football coach, for example, and then you watch Bill Belichick coach, you're like, oh my God. You get it more than the average viewer. I went to professional wrestling school. So if I ever watch somebody, so on the ring, I know how much that hurts and how difficult that shit can be. If you DJ'd, then when you hear DJs and you pick out things like you're an informed listener, which is, I think, is so much different. The Beatles class, like if you play music and you listen to Beatles, like, oh, fuck, this is unbelievable. As opposed to somebody who's just like, I want to hold your hand, so yeah. I find that concept interesting. If you're a cinematographer and you watch a movie with beautiful cinematography, you notice things, right? It's like noticing things in art when you're really into that art has to be just exponentially more satisfying.
Yep, I agreed.
Speaking of sort of through line, you mentioned Daft Punk. This is the only obviously they've had a shit ton of hits and success. They like anonymity, which to me is so antithetical to being famous. I want to be famous so I get noticed all the time, and but this is the total opposite of that.
I challenge everybody listening right now to go out and do a little bit of research on Daft Punk. There was a recent interview with just an absolute legend, and his name is slipping my mind. A legend in the industry who basically got a chance to meet Daft Punk and go into their studio, right? Mm-hmm. And let's preface this, Eric, with you saying these guys have been wildly successful, many successful albums, right? And entire scores for Tron, for example, right, for musical creation, and this really amazing producer goes and sees the Daft Punk studios, and he looks around at this studio, and you know what he sees? Probably a collection of maybe equipment that's worth like $500, a couple studio speakers, a little mixer, a couple of CD decks. And then what he said on this radio show really stood out, and why I like Daft Punk. He's like, it's their music is developed from sheer talent. Sheer extraordinary musical composemanship and talent. And he's like, here I come expecting to see like a Jay-Z type of Eminem 50 Cent type of scenario and setup here. And these dudes have like a couple of studio speakers and like a little mixer and a couple of CE decks, and they create all this sound, all this synth, all this music from sheer talent, right? And so you've got these albums that came out like in 01, Discovery, all hits, no freaking misses, right? Face to Face was like the best track of that album. You got another one. I love it as a technology. Their album from 2013 is literally called Random Access Memories, and there's a track by what's it called? I think it's called Giorgio by Marauder. That's an awesome one. And obviously, if you've seen Tron, you'll know that they did Tron Legacy's entire soundtrack, which was just ridiculous. Now, that all is so cool, but when you see the tools of the artist, wow.
Yeah. It's like Eddie Van Halen Frankenstein together a guitar that fundamentally changed the sound of rock and roll moving forward. And then other real guitar companies started making his Frankenstein monster into something they could sell. It's really interesting.
Eric. Excellent reference. Van Halen was a pioneer, I think, in rock, and also big fan. I love Led Zeppelin. Holy cow, that's one of my favorite original rock bands.
I think Led Zeppelin is the greatest rock. They're not my favorite. They're very close. They're not my favorite, but I think they are the greatest rock and roll band of all time. They are the physical manifestation of the idea of rock and roll. But sex, drugs, and rock and roll, an early death, breaking up after that, infighting, a wild front man with the Banshee scream, one of the best front lead guitar players of all time. Absolutely batshit crazy drummer. It's just like, it's their perfection.
Absolutely. Kashmir 1975, When the Levee Breaks, Lot of Love. I'm trying to think of like I can't, like, there's a bunch of other ones that I can think of. I'm saying if there was a live comment section, people like, Stairway to Heaven, Bill, I swear to God, don't play it. Don't play it.
Just sit here for 12 minutes and listen to Stairway. Led Zeppelin's so good that I went to a cover band 2 years ago down in DC, and you stand up, like, it feels real. 3 hours. It's unfucking believable. It just, they don't make them like they used to. I'll tell you that. They don't make rock and roll bands like they used to.
That's a very special band. Good stuff. I'm really glad. You know, this is Eric. This is why I love your show. This Unscripted. I never get a chance to talk about this stuff. Look who your favorite bands are. I think this is a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, every other podcast, two business people talking a very businessy way about business stuff, and it's not very interesting. I don't think maybe this isn't a certain population, but if you're human, I think you like music, movies, and maybe books. So
I can be pretentious. Go use your favorite search engine, including Search GPT, and you can say, who's Bill Klayman, and it'll tell you.
Listen, I love pretension. Don't get me wrong. This is my thing. I love foams and reductions and paying $500 for a meal. I also like a good hot dog. People should be balanced.
I agree.
Don't be a cupcake. Be tiramisu. Have layers of ladyfingers and espresso. All right. Well, listen, that's now
because I need more caffeine, right, Eric? I got you.
Everybody does, baby. Let me get a little right now before we talk about your back-to-back Christopher Nolan movies.
Man.
Christopher Nolan is so good. He's the only, I've said this on the show before. He is an event. When a Nolan movie comes out, it's huge. And I don't want to pull one of these I liked them before he was cool thing, but I liked them before he was cool. Memento, one of the greatest movies of all time. It could only come from the mind of a cinematic genius and his brother that wrote it. But then he did. So, okay, one more thing before you talk about your movie. He didn't get wrapped up into the M. Night Shyamalan thing because Memento has this twist at the end. Nolan was also able, even though he still does things like Inception, to do really straightforward, great movies. And I think the Batman trilogy bore that out.
This was, you gave me a really hard test. And by the way, I know I'm going to have some people listening to this on replay, which is awesome. Yeah. Eric emails me and he's like, Bill, I need you to pick your 3 favorite bands, 3 favorite movies, and 3 favorite books. And honestly, like, I don't get that question asked very often. And that was really hard to do, man. Like, I had to think about what movies do I really enjoy? What movies would I really want to watch over and over and over again, right? Both from their storytelling perspective, but like, could I put Schindler's List on here? Yeah, I could have. Is it
not a lot of replay value in that one though, unless you like stabbing your heart in the dick.
And like, John Wick, absolutely love him, right? All those movies too. But like the Dark Knight was something very special. Like you said, Christopher Nolan did something really extraordinary by telling this story, and I think he was able to tap into some of the deepest parts of these characters. And I'm not gonna lie to you, like the Joker was just, I mean, his performance in almost losing himself in that role was really extraordinary, right? And I think there's so many one-liners from that movie that you can sort of take away. You either die a hero or you live long enough to become the villain. Is such a strong line. But like the Joker in himself, like his actions and what he tries to do, it's just and there's no blood. There's really no gore in that entire movie because it's the. Do you know why I use a knife? Guns are too quick. You can't savor all the little emotions. Like, holy cow, Joker says this, and they don't actually show him cutting up anybody, but it's that inflection, the fear that he creates. Just a really wonderful movie, man.
It is. And Batman went sort of not exactly linearly, but sort of back to back in casting decisions that the public absolutely hated and had to admit they were horribly wrong. Michael Keaton as Batman the first time, everybody hated that idea because he was coming off of Mr. Mom. He was a comedic actor. He slayed. And then, I don't know if people remember this, but they hated the idea that the guy that played a gay cowboy in Brokeback Mountain was going to be Joker. They were
well said, Eric. Very well said. I just had this exact same conversation with a dear friend of mine. And they gave him so much, after Brokeback Mountain, and this guy just absolutely steals it. He steals it. No, you know what? Rightfully deserved posthumous Oscar.
Oh, absolutely. And then there's like scenes, you know, like the famous Easter egg things when Heath Ledger is seen as the Joker for the first time when he comes into the party. I guess Michael Caine had a line, but he was so shocked at his appearance he forgot it, and they kept that part in the movie. Like, I love all that. He was so, and the twisted origin story where he just keeps you're confused as to where he comes from because he tells a different story every time. There was a lot of like beautiful, nuanced storytelling in this for a superhero movie, which is kind of batshit crazy.
Absolutely. That was it was a fun watch.
And they did the thing that I always beg movies to do, was stop killing the bad guys every single movie. You need some bad guy continuity. That's what Marvel did with Thanos, and it worked out really well. And they didn't kill him, and then somewhat ironically, the real actor dies. What are you gonna do?
Absolutely.
All right, here's another Christopher Nolan classic. I guess they all are at this point. Hold on. Whoa. Movie number 2, Interstellar.
Oh. I mean, what I listen, what do you say about this one? It's just extraordinary in how, I think at least, we broke the traditional concept of space travel and started viewing it beyond what we see as dimensions into that fourth dimension. You know what I'm talking about, the movie shelf scene where he's poking through the fourth dimension to communicate with his loved ones. And just like all of the scenes, for example, the water world, for example, where there was the ticks. Every tick, for example, was a year happening back on Earth. And it forced the viewer to persistently change your perception of the movie, because it forced you to follow linearly and then alinearly as well because of space time. I was triggered by this movie because I have a certain sense of exploration. I think a lot of people do. There's a saying like, we were born too late to explore the world, but too early to explore the universe. So we're sort of stuck in this time right now where we're building the systems to explore the universes, right? That's what we're seeing right now. And love him or hate him, right? Elon Musk just figured out a way through his company to catch a 20-story rocket that was just floating through the sky, and that in itself is potentially the future of how we explore space. This movie was a deep, emotional, scientific exploration. Obviously done by Christopher Nolan, but the story in itself and the parameters around it were just amazing.
And so he hires this guy, Kip Thorne, who's a theoretical physicist, and he served as a scientific consultant on the movie to make sure that the depiction of black holes were accurate, which is unbelievable. And so Christopher Nolan, because he's such a superstar now, is allowed to do all these crazy things. But I think Interstellar says something about the human condition, which is this. The plot. You ready?
No, I go ahead.
Okay, well, I'll go and then you go. I think it's fascinating that the plot centers around this idea that all humans are going to die because, we've ruined the planet, blah, blah, blah. That is it's too big for us to get emotional about. The tear-jerking moments that make you sort of, hold back tears is when the ticking goes and he sees his kids grow up through the videos, and then they eventually stop doing the videos because they've given up on him. That's obviously very emotional, especially if you have children. You can put yourself in that. And then at the end, when he sees his daughter, and it's like, how did you know I'm going to come back? Is because, my daddy told me that. Like, so the fact that the world's dying and we're all going to perish and humanity's gone forever doesn't affect us emotionally. It's these small moments, missing your kids grow up and seeing your, elderly daughter die, which is conceptually bizarre, but it still works. That's weird, I think. Interesting and weird.
There's a line from the movie that I want to make sure our audience hears here, because it speaks to not just to this movie, but where we are, I think, in this world. But we used to look up at the sky wondering about our place in the stars. Now we just look down worrying about our place in the dirt. Amazing, right, Eric? I think that's just amazing line.
It's like there's two horrifying possibilities. One is that we're alone in the universe, as the other is that we're not.
Exactly.
Either way, it's very freaky. All right, let's talk about, this is a sort of a curveball one, but I love this movie with every fiber of my being. I've watched it a million times.
Here it is.
Truman Show. Jim Carrey had a 5, 6, 7 year span where he was just banger after banger after banger with Ace Ventura and The Mask and Dumb and Dumber. Then he did this, and he was so goddamn on fire. And I hope people remember how good he was in his prime.
I would agree with you, and when we watched, you know, when I watched this movie, it was it 1993, I think it came out? We can
1998, actually.
1998, thank you. Let's see, I'm trying to remember. I think I was just I was a freshman, I think, or just actually going into high school at the time. I've probably rewatched this movie quite a bit, and I think what's special about this movie and what I want everyone to think about, maybe now that you've been triggered to watch this again, this was social media.
Yeah.
This
Before
was it.
social media.
This was their social media before social media.
Yeah.
And I think what we saw was a microcosm of what we're experiencing today, where all eyes were on this one person. Now we have all eyes on us, right? Through the means of social media, where, you know, sort of drawing this really weird parallel. People are watching us live. People are watching us, you know, through these reality TV shows, through our constant documentation of our lives, through social media. We all live in our own little Truman Show, except here he was the only one. I'm going to tell you something. I don't know if this is sad or not sad, right? And I know this is upbeat, Eric, and I promise the rest of the conversation, we've got about 15 minutes left, is going to be very happy. There was an interview recently with Jim Carrey. It's recent, Jim Carrey. We're talking like beard, like grizzled. And they asked him, you know, would you ever do a sequel to the Truman Show? And, you know, I think the answer was probably like, no, not really. But then they asked him a really profound question, Eric. They said, what do you think Truman would be like in the sequel, now that he's in this world? And he said, this is Jim Carrey. He said, you know what? At first he'd be, you know, wow, look at all this. And then he'd feel very alone. He'd feel just as alone as he did when he was in his bubble, because now he's nobody, right? And now he's just a part of this massive world. And now he's just a dot, right? As opposed to in the past, he was also alone, right? Where he was sort of the center of this world. And Jim Carrey just gives this absolutely grizzled, truly veteran actor response. And I'm like, well, I'd still watch that movie because you can do that man justice. But holy cow, what an extraordinary answer. I thought that movie was just absolutely amazing. And just kind of how it was shaped around Jim Carrey and his performance. I thought it was insane, and it's just so good. A good show, a good movie to just rewatch.
Beautifully constructed too. The way he slowly finds out, and then the snowball effect, and then the climax is unbelievable. 94% on Rotten Tomatoes from the critics. This is one of those movies. You know, I do the show a lot, ask the same questions. There's some movies that I think they're victims of set and setting in some ways, because unless you were there in 1998 and saw this pre-social media, it quite didn't have the impact. So, for instance, The Godfather. Like, I'm exhausted about talking about The Godfather, but if you were there in 1970, whatever, that was the first gangster movie. Like, they set a lot of tropes. The idea of the head of the family stroking a cat, it's been parodied a million times. That was the first time it happened. Pulp Fiction, great movie now, but if you were there then, it changed the way dialogues worked. It changed the structure of how movies, like Quentin Tarantino's changed cinema. Great movie now if you're 16 and you weren't around 1994 to watch it. The Truman Show, like, it's great on its own, but it was such a novel concept at the time. Now we have Big Brother and Zoom calls and everything else. This was before all that shit. It was what the concept was batshit crazy, and now it's normal, and that's weird.
Hey, you know what? Before we move on, I'm gonna read off one line from there. Christoph, who was the guy that made the whole show, right? He's the man of the moon, right? The man of the moon.
Yeah.
Truman asked him, was nothing real? And Christoph's answer was, you were real. That's what made you so good to watch. And it's just, that's our life right now. Like, you are real, which is why so many people want to tune in, and you control that reality. And I think, unlike Truman, who desperately tried to get out, you know, we are our own stars, I think. And that's kind of fascinating that we are all sort of living our own little Truman Show.
And it's interesting too, because we present, when we're on social media, a very curated, edited version of our lives. Whereas because he was being manipulated by other people, they saw the pure thing, which I don't know. Something to that too, I think.
Very, very true. And we can talk about social media. I love it. I love the platforms that I use. And what's interesting about at least my social media channels, and I hope that people listening, I connect with all of you. It's not curated. It's me, 100% me, whether it's Facebook, LinkedIn, X, which I don't really use that much any longer. But all of that is 100%, you know, me. Maybe I wouldn't be that fun to watch.
Interesting.
I'd be boring.
I do a lot more of me, but I'm mostly just drunk and nobody wants to see that. This is okay. Let's go to literature because we only have like 11 minutes.
Oh, I'm so excited, Erica. I was
This is
waiting
the
for this
wildest. So this is the second time this book has been on here. I'm still shocked that something like this exists. Let me just it is a novel about DevOps and IT management.
It's a fictional story to teach you very valuable principles, man.
What a niche novel to write, but it's sold 1 billion copies. Everybody loves it. It's got 5 stars on Amazon and 4.5. So why do you love the Phoenix Project?
I'm gonna have to take a drink of water. Hang on.
Please do, yeah. Man.
No idea this book existed. Until a friend of mine is like, Bill, you got to read this. First of all, the main protagonist's name is Bill.
Yay. Okay, there you go. Right.
Okay. All right. Everybody listening, the 3 books that Eric and I are going to talk about are some of my favorites. And it's certainly the first 2. The third, I know the ones at the end are a little bit different. I recommend that you read this book. I really do, because it's fictional. It allows you to sort of ingest yourself into this story, not just about DevOps. So DevOps is the world of coding and development and application is all of that, right? It teaches you really important principles of working in the IT environment. It teaches you something known as systems thinking. So understanding the entire system and not just individual parts, and then focusing and optimizing the whole system rather than local optimizations. Basically, how do you work with seeing the big pictures from everything from visualizing the work and development to operations and working with the customer. The other big thing that I talked about, and this is stuff that I wrote down, was the amplification of feedback loops, which basically means building rapid feedback to detect issues and fix them very, very quickly. So instead of having barriers and cubicles between teams where they just throw their work over the wall and say it's not my responsibility anymore, you create these small continuous improvements where you actually help create a better environment where problems are spotted early by different people in the groups. And then the other one that I absolutely love was the lesson of continuous experimentation and continuous learning. I can't express that enough. Focusing on resilience rather than strict adherence to plans, like having those blinders on and not understanding that there's other things that you can create and develop, and really, really creating a team where you encourage knowledge and sharing collaboration across departments. They talked about different types of working and different types of characters in their roles. For example, there was something known as the improvement kata that they talked about in the book, and start with small incremental changes rather than large disruptive ones, because that's where you can actually create true change. And then treating each deployment or feature or development release as an experiment that yields data and insights. So even if it fails,
you learn.
It could be valuable. It could be exceedingly valuable. There was really good conversations around things like constraints to roadblocks, working with practical applications on how to identify things like roadblocks. So this is for executives. This is for development people. This is for IT folks, really sort of anyone. And one of the biggest takeaways that I had in this, and this is something I try and apply to my executive work and everything else, improving daily work is even more important than doing daily work.
Would you say that it's approachable for people that aren't in DevOps? Is
100%. It could be, you could be a florist and you can read this and you can think of it. How do I understand the constraints that are in my business? Like the single biggest leverage points in any systems. How do I identify those? It could be any business where you're trying to, okay, I've got this business. How do I successfully standardize a practice across a team that builds flowers, a team that does checkout, a team that builds Legos, right? There's ways that you can actually create these improvements, right, that they talk about regardless of your role. Obviously, it speaks to more of a technical mind, but I think it absolutely scales across anyone. I like this book a lot. It was a good one, man.
Everybody seems to. I read the reviews. Like I said, it's been on the show before. It seems universally beloved certainly in the CEO space. So how bad could it be? We could stay on this, but I think we don't have much time left. So I do want to get to the other ones. Never Split the Difference. This one comes up. It's never been on this show, but it's always linked, like how to win friends and influence people, the power of habit. It's always like right there. I've never read it, but it's very, very popular. What do you love about Never Split the Difference?
Ooh, negotiating as if your life depended on it. So the former CIO of Switch Data Centers, Missy Young, was the one that recommended this to me. So if she's listening, props to you. It's a guide that's based on Chris Voss, who was a former FBI hostage negotiator, and he basically, obviously, negotiate as if your life depends on it. He teaches you powerful techniques for negotiating with favorable outcomes, both for business and personal scenarios. Psychology. Eric, I don't know how else to call it. So you learn about something known as tactical empathy, right? Show that you understand emotions and perspectives of your counterpart. So actually hearing, not just listening, and then using empathy to build trust and encourage cooperation without conceding ground, right? So without giving up, how do I actually listen it, right? And then there's really cool techniques like labeling, like when you're speaking to someone, you can say something like, it seems like you're feeling, and then you express their emotion back to clarify that you really understands them. And then techniques like mirroring, right? Repeating the last few words to build a rapport to make them feel like they're really heard. And this is just can be done in a regular conversation, where you can really impact somebody. Then there's a really important part to this, and this is where it is a section of the book called the no technique, where contrary to typical negotiation wisdom, getting to know is actually a good thing, a breakthrough point, because when people say no, they feel safe, they're in control, and they're ready to negotiate, and they're ready to engage. So when you hear no, get comfy in your chair, because asking questions to allow them to say no creates a space for a more honest and open dialogue. Would it be a terrible idea if we did this and they say, no, I don't think so? Wow, I really appreciate that response. You don't think so? Educate me. Why do you think so? And then you get in this collaborative approach. He talks about something known as the Ackerman bargaining method, which I wrote down. It's a tactical approach to price negotiation using very specific increments. So if this is something that's in your business, you set your target price, and then it tells you based on percentages how you ebb and flow, and then ultimately offering something to make the other side feel like they've gained not even a big victory, a small one. So I think that's a good one. There, he talks about the illusion of control, which I don't like the way he phrases it. I don't like making people feel like they're being tricked. Yeah. These conversations make like, for example, making the other person feel in control by allowing them to come up with a solution. I don't like that statement. I don't like making them feel I want them to come up with a solution. I want them to collaborate with me. So it's not an illusion of control. It's the sharing of control by allowing the other party to feel like they have something very valuable to say. The other really important one, and I'm promising we're going to stop on this, the importance of silence. Practicing effective pauses to give way to a statement and let the other party react. I am not good at that. I want to work on that, and I want to make sure that I leave this book with one final statement. There's a quote that I wrote down, knowing that you probably ask me, okay, people want to be, no, that's not the right one. I'm sorry. Scratch that. I know we're live. Yep, he who has learned to disagree without being disagreeable has discovered the most valuable secret of negotiation.
All right. I think the illusion of control thing too, if I'm extrapolating here, probably comes from a big part of his hostage negotiator background. I think more so in business, maybe that's important there. But can you imagine how stressful? I don't want to dumb this now, but can you imagine how stressful that job is? Hostage. I've heard that the most stressful job in the world is air traffic control, like LaGuardia or something, and that makes sense. But I have to think a close second. Is hostage negotiation?
Jesus. I absolutely agree with you. I'm glad this person wrote down their experience.
It's very important. All right, so the next one you did too. I'm going to do the one I'm more familiar with. I've read it. I've watched the movie. I love the movie. I know it gets shit, but I think it's very accurate to the comic book. Watchmen is so good, and it says so many important things. And from what I understand, Alan Moore wanted to use the DC characters. Like he wanted Nightwing to be Batman, and I forget who was who. I think Dr. Manhattan was going to be Superman, and they wouldn't allow him because it's so dark. But it tells such a good story, and I think it's a parable. It's just brilliant. What do you like about it?
I honestly, I like all of it. And I think that, it got poo-pooed on mainly because the actual movie tried to stay as close as possible. And it was a 3-hour flick, if you remember that one, to Watchmen as it was. And I do feel like they did a good job. Listen, Alan Moore The Killing Joke, for example,
Yeah.
the Batman graphic novels. I am a big fan of graphic novels, period. I think that this is an absolutely insane, wonderful graphic novel that tells an extraordinary story of these groups of people from different parts of life, and how they try to both lead lives as superheroes, but also as people, just regular people as well. And there's so many just absolutely insane, right? When, for example, when you have this godlike, literally a godlike figure gets bored of the world and goes and travels and creates a freaking landscape on Mars. And the perspective from this individual of how he sees humanity is it itself an exploration of something really, really fascinating. What happens when a human becomes godlike and all of a sudden sees all of humanity in a different way? And I think that there's despite its darkness, there were really an overture of positivity, right? No, not even in the face of Armageddon, never compromise. And that was one of the most important statements, I think, from Watchmen. And the other one is, who watches the Watchmen?
I was just going to say that. I think that's the greatest line maybe of any comic book.
Agreed with you there. I love this graphic novel. I think it's great. I'm really glad that they did release the movie that did a decent job doing it justice.
Yeah. And I think too, so comic books were always very, Captain America versus the Nazis, Superman, the ultimate like American good guy. This introduced, it may not have been the first, but it was one of the most prominent that did morally complex superheroes. There's good and bad in everybody. I mean, the comedian is, that whole thing is great. It's so good. And again, we're post morally complex superheroes. We love Deadpool and Wolverine and all this, but this was the first, I think, to really introduce this idea. And it was groundbreaking.
Comedian was extraordinary. Great reference.
And then, thanks. And then the whole thing with Silk Spectre and the comedian's relationship, like that's so complicated. Oh, it's so good. I think, oh God, we did the hour. Do you want to talk about Apollo at all?
Oh my gosh. Has it really been an hour?
Yeah. Well, flies, right? When you talk about Watchmen and Truman.
I don't know. Hey, everybody. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Apollo, and we are the industry multi-tenant MLOps and AI platform. The best way I can describe it is think of the Amazon services layer, like SageMaker, for example. I have it, and I can white label it. And what we've been doing is basically going into some of the biggest data centers in the country, and they will buy the hardware, those really expensive, fancy GPUs, and we are the software layer that sits on top of it, impacting some of the most extremely cool use cases out there, everything from like cattle to banks to creating synthetic data for medical imaging. We are the factory floor, effectively, that allows you to build, design any kind of AI solution. That's what Apollo is.
That was a beautiful elevator pitch. You mentioned cattle, and I just want to tie things together. Briefly, after professional wrestling school, I considered going to auctioneering school, and you know what you practice on? Selling cattle. Huh?
Cow.
How much did we teach the American public today?
You know what? We have an extra couple seconds. I'm gonna give you this use case. So in Nebraska, there are many, many fields, tens of thousands of acres, and there's cattle on them. And spread out between them are cameras, and they're monitoring for infectious diseases, like how it's snot, is it walking weird, is it not eating right? And in the past, it took this company, this big agricultural company, 2 to 3 weeks to run a model, an AI model, to identify a disease. Well, they took that and put it on my infrastructure in Omaha, Nebraska, and they took that model down from 2 to 3 weeks down to 1 to 2 hours. Now I'm a city slicker, right? I don't know what that means, Eric. And I'm like, can you educate that? What does that mean? They're like, Bill, do you know how much a single head of cattle costs? I'm like, no, teach me. They're like between $3,000 and $5,000. So what you've effectively done for us is you've reduced the amount of time we can catch an infectious disease from 2 to 3 weeks down to 1 to 2 hours. We don't know how many millions of dollars you've saved for us, but we are going to take this exact same visual acuity telemetry model and apply it to potatoes.
What if you drive prices down with steak and potatoes? Can you imagine? Because that is the American meal, but more so than cheeseburgers and hot dogs. We are a steak and potato country. What if you single-handedly drive down the cost and we can all enjoy it again?
And if that's the first time that people hear about us on this show, I love it, and I don't mind. Let's make a healthier cow. That's cool.
My God, look at you! You're really changing the world. I'm not being facetious.
One spud at a time, Eric Ryan.
Way to go! That's the way to do it. That's the way to do it. Do me a favor. I'm going to log off the live. Can you stick around in the green room for a couple seconds?
Sure can.
All right, man. America, thanks for tuning in. I think this was a great episode. Perhaps the best. I'm not sure. I'll go back and watch the tape. Anyway, I'll be back tomorrow. Have a lovely, get out there and vote. Do the right thing. Don't bow to fascism, please, dear